With Farage still riding high in the polls, there are plenty of people that think he could end up as the next occupant of number 10 Downing Street. To do this though, he needs to convince the electorate that he can be trusted to actually run the country. So with this in mind, this week he launched a bold new proposal in which those with non-domiciled status, or non-doms, could pay £250,000 in order to avoid paying certain UK taxes. So in this video, we're going to have a look at what the Britannia Card idea is, how it would change the current rules for non-doms, and whether it could actually raise some money for the Exchequer. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. Now, before we get on to exactly what the Britannia Card is, we first need to understand what the non-dom tax rules were and how the remittance scheme was changed. Essentially, a non-dom is someone who lived in the UK but claimed that their permanent home was outside the UK. The title existed for tax purposes and had nothing to do with nationality, citizenship or resident status. Now, prior to the 6th of April, when Rachel Reeves' non-dom changes were introduced, the scheme was pretty generous. Those that had non-dom status only had to pay tax on money they earn in the UK, not any money made elsewhere in the world, unless it was brought into the UK. This was known as the remittance scheme. It gave the wealthy a lucrative opportunity to avoid paying a large amount of tax, as without the scheme, they'd be subject to paying income and corporation tax on foreign income and gains. Now, there were some notable caveats. For individuals that had been here at least 7 of the last 9 years, they had to pay £30,000 a year in order to keep the status. This rose to £60,000 if an individual has been here 12 of the last 14 years. Anyone who had been in the UK for 15 out of the previous 20 tax years was automatically classified as being UK domiciled and could therefore no longer take advantage of the scheme. On the 6th of April though, the system changed drastically. Rather than base the system on domicile, it became based on residency. Anyone who'd been a resident for less than 4 years is given 100% tax relief on their foreign income and gains, in a similar manner to non-doms under the previous system. After this, they'll have to pay income and capital gains tax on any foreign income like everyone else. Essentially, the scheme is now time limited, and individuals are not able to pay to extend it. Now, this is where Farage and Reform UK come in. They claim that Labour's changes have led to an alarming exodus of high-spending, high-tax-paying residents, which has caused huge collateral damage to the British economy. Now, to be fair, there's some evidence to this point. Research by Oxford Economics suggests that a number of tax advisors expect around 40% of their clients to leave, which would equate to about a £1.4 billion loss to the Treasury each year, meaning losses could total £7.1 billion by the end of the Parliament. Even prior to the changes made by Labour, there's been a notable downturn in the number of non-doms in the UK. In 2007-2008, there were around 137,000 non-doms, which decreased to only 74,000 between 2024 and 25. So, in order to address this, they promised to introduce the Britannia Card. It provides non-doms and foreign nationals moving to the UK the opportunity to purchase such a card for £250,000, something they describe as an entry tax. Like non-doms under the old system, they'd still be required to pay tax on income and gains made in the UK, but would be exempt from paying tax on foreign income and gains. According to Reform, this would restore the remittance basis. There are 3 key differences from the old system though. Firstly, those that purchase the card would also be exempted from inheritance tax. Second, there would be no additional fees or limits. It would simply have to be renewed for free every 10 years. And thirdly, the revenue from these cards would be transferred annually, tax-free, to the bank accounts of the lowest 10% of workers, which is roughly 2.5 million workers in the UK that earn less than £23,000. As a result of encouraging more high-wealth individuals to come to the UK, Reform claims that the policy would raise between £1.5 billion and £2.5 billion annually. This would equate to about £600 to £1,000 per low-paid worker. The real question though is, do Reform's numbers actually add up? Well, there's already been somewhat of a war of words on X over this exact question between Neidle, a British tax lawyer, and Yusuf, Reform's head of Doge. They basically disagree in 3 areas. First, Neidle claims that certain skilled workers would be worse off, as the system ends the current non-dom system. This means that, for instance, an expat arriving in the UK would need to pay tax at home and in the UK unless they could afford a Britannia card. For high-skilled workers, this would act as a disincentive. Yusuf disagrees and hit back, essentially claiming that at no point did they say that it would replace the current scheme. Neidle points out, though, that it would need to be replaced, otherwise new arrivals would have to wait 4 years to pay for a Britannia card, as they'd be able to use the current system to avoid tax before needing to buy the card. Second, Neidle claims that the scheme would sacrifice all of the tax revenue of the very wealthy who had no plans to leave the UK. This group was already set to pay large sums in tax, which would now be sacrificed. And remember, it's not like the £250,000 fee can even offset this, partly because it doesn't cover the amount of lost tax, but also because it's being directly handed to low-paid workers rather than going back into the Exchequer. Because of this, Neidle suggests that the scheme would lose around £33.9 billion between 26-27 and 29-30. Yusuf basically argues here that the wealthy aren't planning on staying in the UK, and that this policy would reverse the exodus. Therefore, he claims the £33.9 billion figure is disingenuous. And finally, Neidle claims that as a result of the multitude of changes made by governments in the last decade or so, there would be a reluctance to take up the card, as no one would be sure that the scheme would actually survive. Yusuf basically just responds by claiming that Neidle doesn't know how the people in question think. All in all, whether this new Britannia card is a good idea or not, it'll be interesting to see if Reform can sell it to their voters, who are generally pretty left-wing on economic issues and thus presumably instinctively opposed to the idea of tax breaks for foreign bajillionaires. Now, when talking about topics like these, it's important to be precise, and precision is also crucial to our sponsor this week, Henson Shaving. Henson's AL13 razor, which they produce at their aerospace machine shop, perfectly holds the blades at a 30-degree angle and extends it only 0.0013 inches, less than the width of a human hair, which means incredibly high tolerances, very high standards, and superb precision, offering a much healthier shave compared to the overpriced plastic razor cartridges. And speaking of plastic, Henson razors are completely plastic free, from the blade to the box. Everything Henson send to you is entirely recyclable, meaning that while you protect your skin from an expensive razor burn, you're also protecting the environment from adding to the 2 billion razor cartridges that are thrown away every year in the US alone. Finally, buying Henson razors is simply cheaper. No longer will you be forced into buying those expensive and unsupportive replacement blades, as Henson blades cost about 10 cents each. This allows you to replace your blades more frequently, so you don't need to keep dragging a dull razor across your face to try and get value out of that overpriced plastic. If you want to try it out, go to hensonshaving.com/TLDR or click the link in the description, then add a razor and 100 blades to your cart. Once you've done that, add our discount code TLDR at checkout and you'll get all of those blades totally free. And you'll be on your way to a healthier shave.